Hello to my earth signs Capricorn, Taurus and Virgo. Welcome to the Gemini full moon. You'll find the timestamps for your rising signs listed below. Hello Capricorn rising, welcome to your horoscope for the Gemini full moon happening on November the 27th at 8:16 p.m. if you're in the southern hemisphere with me. It's Monday night. So if your body is nearish to me on planet Earth, I'd encourage you to look to the eastern horizon at 8:15 on Monday night, because the moon will be just rising and it will be exactly full in that moment. So it'll be Monday, the weekend will have happened. There's going to be a lot of coolant that we'll need. Hopefully we can experience that from the glow of the full moon. A nice conversation to have with a full moon that's not eclipsed as well. There'll be a nice release that we can feel, and encouragement to talk, to say something. And this doesn't have to be with folks around you or on the internet or anywhere like that. In fact, I wouldn't hold it against you if you have unplugged for a time, because it does feel like all of our fuses are at an end. It feels really like overwhelming in the system. So having said just that, there are some aspects here in this astrology which might speak to further conflict. So I'm going to go through them with you as well, Capricorn. But when I say conversation, I really do mean with the moon. I think that I've said it to you before, but you can say what you want to the moon. She'll never reject you. She will take everything that you have to give. And there is such a feeling of release and cleansing that can happen when we get things off our chest, out of our mind. Gemini is so focused on the mind because it's an air sign, because it does speak to our internal workings of our brain. And it's a mutable sign, which means that it gives way to the energy of the next season. And so there's sort of like a malleability or an impressionability that happens there, which is probably why a lot of Geminis talk a mile a minute once they get going, which is probably why a lot of Geminis will dissociate and internalize and cut off from communication because their systems are overwhelmed. At a moon in Gemini, a full moon in Gemini, we are dealing with some pretty harsh, pretty intense feelings, because the moon does move our emotions, our physical self. To have that so interwoven with the mind, it can sort of be a bit of a dance between what is reality, what is the truth. Am I safe? Maybe not. As my trigger responses acting up again. I've been thinking a lot about my own trigger responses, but also the commonality that we all have of the different parts of the brain taking precedence over our behaviors sometimes. Sometimes it's impossible to stop procrastinating or to make work or to move ahead or move forward, because a different part of our brain has us in lockstep, has us locked, has us in complete survival mode. And that can often be freeze. Some people, it's fight, it's a kickback. Some people, it's freeze, and they just stop and can't move. All of these things I'm reminded of when I think about a full moon in Gemini, when I think about the first decan, the first wedge of Gemini, which is where this moon will be at 4 degrees. So the sun has just entered, we're just entree into Sagittarius season. The sun's at 4 degrees of Sag, the moon's at 4 degrees of Gemini. And so this is the card that we're sort of working with, which to me is the freeze response in a drawing. There's so much information surrounding this person, so many variants in thought, in truth, that they feel trapped by it. They feel that they can't move. And in fact, it's a bit of a doom scroll, you might say as well, in this image. What we want to say to this person is that you're not as trapped as you think you are. There is a way through and a way out, and the inspiration, the communication will start to flow if you just begin. And sometimes it's hard to begin, and that's where it stops, But once you get on a roll, it's kind of hard to shut a Gemini up once they get going. I'll tell you that much for truth. The other card, in sort of comparison to the Eight of Swords, is the overarching major secret of Gemini, which is the Lovers. Alan Oken is a great astrologer, and they have a theory on the symbol of Gemini, which is the two semicircles and the two lines, right? Twins, one the other. It can also represent two mirrors bouncing and refracting light to one another, allowing the other to see themselves in the eyes of their loved one. Hopefully, their loved one is able to reflect back as well. That interchange of sharing. And it's not just light, it's not just love, it's shadow too, it's pain. If we can hold space for those that we love through every texture and colour of their reality, we're doing a good job in friendship and in relationship. If we find ourselves in relationships that only can accept us as one version of ourselves, and the rest is exhausting or humiliating or too much, it's a hard lesson to learn, but we must understand that that relationship was not for us. So when I look to your birth chart, Capricorn rising, I see Gemini in your 6th house of repetition, of commitment, and of sometimes servitude, the grind, hard work. I think about the body as well. When I think about the 6th house, I think about the systems that are all working in complete unconscious repetition to keep us alive. I think about our health in the 6th house. So this full moon in your 6th house might point to a great conversation that we're having around habits, because repetition in a stickier aspect can be habitual. We keep ourselves in a certain way of being, a certain way of thinking, a certain search for relief, because that groove is just too deep, and that's where we've found ourselves. We can't reprimand ourselves for that. We can definitely chat it out and talk about it and find the key that we're actually not as stuck as we think we might be. That by talking about it with someone that you trust, by engaging in things like therapy, psychology, I wish that that was freeware for us all. It's a hard thing to get into, the habit. It's definitely worth the commitment. I can say that from personal experience. Some of my most wisest investments with my resources have been in relationship with a psychologist. So that could be one discussion that we might have. When I look at the sun in Sagittarius, I think about your 12th house, Capricorn rising, and the 12th is very private. It's the hidden chambers of our psyche. It's parts of us that we don't really need to, or possibly can't, talk about with people that we're in relationship with, because it's impossible. Maybe in a gentle relationship with a psychologist, these things can be revealed. Certain habits, certain behaviors that have formed over time can be revealed through proper psychotherapy with a trained professional. Sometimes we do this work ourselves. Sometimes we can meditate to a point where things are revealed to us. Sometimes we can really commit to the act of healing and journey down different pathways by ourselves and discover parts of our psyche that we didn't realize were there. This is Sagittarius. This is the season for it. 'Tis the season, Capricorn rising, so stick with me. There is a square pressurized combat between Sagittarius at this full moon and also Pisces, your 3rd house of the goddess, of the ritual, of language, of speaking about it, of sharing healing practices with voice, and this 6th house of repetition. So I'll explain it to you, hopefully not in a way that gets too confusing. Essentially, the planet Saturn, the one that we would probably call the daddy of the zodiac, the planet that actually rules your sign and that guides you through, that shows you the way. Capricorns are often very good with working with the energy of Saturn. It's one of the resources they have that will have them commit, have them do the work, have them climb that mountain. And so right now, Saturn is in Pisces, in your third house of the goddess, of the ritual, of the voice, of the neighborhood. And so this is nice. So we've been working with this, and we continue to work with this for the next couple of years, refining those skills, refining the container and the boundary that we need with our intuitive qualities, our dreamlike potential capabilities, and siphoning them into a way that works for us and helps us to continue to achieve in the way that a Capricorn rising would want to. But at this moment, there is a square between Mars, who is also in your 12th house, in your unconscious realms. The day before this Gemini full moon, that square was exact. So there might be a bit of a jolt to the system as far as this sort of work. There may be an unclogging in some way of something that was buried that is now being brought forward. Speaking further to that idea, the planet Mars itself just went through a bit of a trial by fire in Scorpio, in your 11th house of community, belonging, friendship, the greater group. And so this Cazimi, as it's called, when the Mars and the Sun are in the same degree, starts a fresh cycle for Mars. And so for the next 2 years, Mars will possibly be working with the intent of a Scorpio, which is different to the intent of Aries, which is very head first and diving forward. With Scorpio, it's calculated. There's a strategy. There's a long game here. So perhaps when thinking about your sense of belonging and your bravery in that space, this is a long game. And this is sort of something that had their moment in Scorpio and has now entered your hidden workings. So probably stick by Saturn at this time, if you can possibly do so, when it comes to your physical health, when it comes to your repetitious cycles, the work that you feel that you're committed and have to do, that you're obligated to do. Let's let the moon do its work. Let the moon start the conversation. Bring it up, even if you'd much prefer not to look at it. But let's also feel that sort of strength from Saturn to be able to hold the container. And it's in a beautiful place, in the house of the goddess, the third house, the house of the village, language. Maybe take a leaf out of Gemini's book and articulate yourself, Capricorn rising. I'm going to get you some tarot, but I would like to speak about goddess worship too, because this is where Saturn is, this is where your guiding planet is at this full moon in Gemini. I'm going to speak about one of mine in particular, which you'll probably have a chuckle at, but maybe, stick with me, my story gets better. I do have a copy of Cassandra Speaks over by the Peace Lily. My mum lent that to me, and we're talking about the reimagining or the revision of ancient myth and the stories that we tell ourselves or stories that have been told to us over time. Certain points in culture, they need an absolute revision. And so in my goddess worship, speaking of Gemini, I think of Catwoman heaps. I was never a Batman fan before, and I'm not a Batman fan after, but this movie in particular moved my soul to a point that I've never quite fully been able to come back from. You can see my handmade merch that I've got here that I'm wearing. I was 8 when Batman Returns came out, and so there was a lot of the language I didn't understand. I didn't know what she was talking about, but I knew what she was talking about. And that image of someone who is so contained and small and downtrodden, reaching a point of critical break and reinventing themselves, of masking up, of presenting the hidden parts of their psyche so vividly and so clearly, and then witnessing their reaction, they're reacting from the obvious trauma that they've recently been through to a point of kamikaze, to a point of defeat. But then, at the end, triumph again, because a cat has 9 lives. Nothing had happened to me when I was 8. I was going through my life as a magical little creature, and nothing yet. Soon it would, but not then had it happened. But I understand this totem being presented to me so young, and the impression that it's had with me moving forward. And my astrology having my moon placement in Gemini at a pretty tricky moment. And so understanding the inner workings of Gemini, getting to know them, getting to know the duality of my nature, the binary that I'm breaking free of. When the movie was released in 1992 on the 16th of June, the sun was in Gemini, in an exact conjunction with Venus. And so triggering my birth chart, my moon, the art and the beauty and the empathy from the performance of Michelle Pfeiffer filled me up unconsciously and has carried forth with me to this very day. In fact, friends of mine will probably laugh and get a bit fed up with my devotion to the image of this particular Catwoman, the pathos that was achieved through this marvelous performance. And so whenever I have a difficult time with my Gemini moon, I put on my Catwoman and I sit with her and I rewrite the script so that she works through her trauma rather than let it defeat her. I got the 10 of Cups, the Hermit, and the 2 of Cups. So this is a fallacy. We understand this. As beautiful as it might be, Capricorn rising, this sort of happily ever after, this nuclear family, this one meets the other, births the other. Here's the picture, gorgeous. This is often not the end of the story in life. In fact, it very rarely is. The more that you sort of develop and ask questions about love and life and relationships and family dynamics, the more that you'll find the depth of the variant of that story. It can sometimes stick in our mind, though, as a sense of failure, that we never achieved this, or this is not, people like us don't have access to that because of the way that we are. And that can be pretty cruel. The Hermit's come out here, this Virgo self, this Virgo part of you, this part that is, I feel, on some sort of solo mission to open up more language around your sense of faith and your sense of spirituality, your sense of understanding the world around you and how you can in fact create with that and bring that sort of spiritual fluff down to a sense of reality that you're working towards. That's a solo enterprise, and perhaps that's much needed work for you to do at this time, Capricorn rising, to enjoy a bit of 2 of Cups action, to enjoy a bit of relationship, a bit of coming together, a bit of a meeting of the minds. No one can say for sure how many times this is going to happen for us. What I do know is that we never know it's the last time. That we can't be sure of. So if it's this craving of connection, this craving of coming into contact with someone that understands you, then I would take this alone time and put it to good use. Learn more about yourself. Refine your relationship with your goddesses, as it were, your deities, your archetypes, the stories that you tell yourself. Relearn some of the classic ones. I can suggest the short story Galatea by Madeline Miller as a great entree into this. My friend lent it to me very recently and I read it in half an hour. It's very short, but it's the Pygmalion myth, but from Galatea's perspective, who in fact didn't have a name until the Renaissance. That's the truth too. She was just the woman created by the hand of man as the perfect partner. In Galatea by Madeline Miller, she has humanity, and she will not stand for that humanity to be ignored. It's powerful, powerful work, and a reimagining of the story. and a prompting to find the asteroid Galatea and where that might be in your birth chart too. This is interaction. This is magic at work as far as I can see it. Learning, reading, reconciling, moving forward. I didn't know at 8 years old that at 40 I'd still be just as obsessed with Catwoman as I am now and wear my makeup like her when I'm feeling blue. But I reckon that 8-year-old kid would have thought that was cool and want to know why. And that they were onto something. Take the moment by yourself, Capricorn rising. There'll be plenty more time for Two of Cups vibes after you've set aside maybe a bit of the fallacy about happy ever after. Life goes on. Much love to you, babe. Now we are entering into gift-giving season. I'm very aware of that. So if you'd like to give the gift of Uma to someone, to a loved one, send me an email at urok@umaruby.com. That's the letters urok@umaruby.com. And you can get a birth chart certificate for someone. That's clunky. You understand. A voucher to give to someone. And they can have a reading with me. I'll draw their chart. They look like that. If you'd like another reading with me, head to Umaruby and book in. Go for it. If I've not read for you before, I encourage you to take the jump. There's so much to be seen in personal natal chart astrology that goes a little deeper. You can support my work here at Horoscope Land at buymeacoffee.com/Umaruby. It's 10 Australian dollars a month. You can throw some tip money in the jar there too, which would be very much appreciated at this time. I'm going to be back in action with you to describe the new moon in Sagittarius happening in 2 weeks. So on the 13th of December, that will be happening. Back in focus with your 12th house, your unconscious leanings, your spiritual connection, your magic. And we'll have some lovely things to say to each other at that time too. So until then, I love you. Peace out. Meow. Hello, Taurus rising. Welcome to your horoscope for the Gemini full moon happening on Monday night on the 27th of November at 8:15 p.m. So if your body is near mine-ish on planet Earth, I'd encourage you to look over to the eastern horizon at 8:15 because the moon will be rising at that moment and it will be its fullest at that exact moment. The moon on the chart for this is in exact conjunction with the rising, the ascendant marker. So this moon will be coming into our view full of conversation, full of communication, full of the ability for us to get it out of our body, off our chests and into the ether. One thing that we can do with a full moon is we can shout and we can scream and we can howl and we can yell at the moon if we need to. If there's aggression that needs to be directed, the moon's the perfect place to do that. And don't worry, she'll never, ever, ever take it personally. That's one of her superpowers, is to shine back to us what we've been feeling somewhere in the subterranean. Now for you, Taurus rising, Gemini rules your second house, which is your value, your money, your access to resources, and what you are going to put those resources to, how that aligns with your values and your sense of having enough. Now, a full moon in this house would be a great opportunity to assess the work that you've done so far, assess the development that you've achieved in that part of your life. And it's also a great time to get off your own back if things have been a little bit tricky in that part too. If money has been more difficult to come by, or if there has been a sense of tension around having what you need to get through, that's completely, perfectly fine and the perfect time to have those conversations. The sign Gemini is mutable air. And so air speaks to our mind, the way that we think, our intellect. And the mutable quality of Gemini means it's malleable, it's impressionable, it's conversational. And so a Gemini moon, sometimes as difficult as they can be, it's not the best place for the moon, and sometimes it can be quite frenetic. However, this encouragement to talk about whatever it is that's on your mind is playing out here. Now, the sun is in Sagittarius. We've just entered Sagittarius season, so happy birthday to any Sagittarians that have their sun in that house. And Sagittarius for you is your 8th house, which is where our resources are interwoven with others, our obligations to other energies, other personalities, and loved ones in this life. The 8th also speaks about our access to grief, how we mourn, and what lessons in life bring us to an understanding and a resolution with those emotions. So you can see the quality of Sagittarius, which is mutable fire. So Gemini is mutable air, mutable intellect. Sagittarius is mutable fire. It's candles, it's magic. It's passion and drive contained in a beautiful display of quiet peace and solitude. I like this image of like an altar of candles in your 8th house. I think Taurus rising. There's a great devotion there and a great honouring of grief that can happen by candlelight. There's also lots of other beautiful, beautiful, intense, valuable emotions that can be felt by candlelight. There's a lot of things that can be brought to life by candlelight too. Now, we are dealing with some pressure at this full moon. I'm not going to lie, there is a very intense aspect that I'll speak you through. So the sun is in Sagittarius, and also too is the planet Mars. Now Mars has a difficult relationship with you. Mars has just left your 7th house in Scorpio of your intimate relationships, your bondings, and it's also been through something called a cazimi, which means that Mars and the sun were in the exact same degree of the zodiac on the 18th of November. And so in that symbology, it's like a trial by fire, the beginning of a new cycle for Mars moving forward, being textured and coloured with the sentiments of Scorpio. So Mars in Scorpio does really well, as I said, but it's about strategy and about the long game rather than about the sort of more bolshy head-first activation of Aries. So Mars, moving around the zodiac for the next 2 years, will be singing and playing out this story. So take this moment, take this Gemini full moon as a marker point when you think about the confidence that you have in relationships, when you think about the passion that you wish for in relationships and how that's going to evolve for you over the next 2 years. However, right now, having just entered Sagittarius, the day before this full moon in Gemini, Mars was at 0 degrees of Sagittarius, squaring pressure with Saturn in Pisces. So this conversation, this face-off between two malefic planets. Malefic means the ones that bring harsher, harder lessons to reconcile. Saturn is kind of like the daddy of the zodiac, the brusque taskmaster, the one that will put you through your paces, the one that will show you where you need to tighten your belt and buckle up and get to work. So for you, Taurus rising, Pisces is your 11th house, your sense of community, friendship, cooperation, and belonging in the human species. And so this coldness, this severity of Saturn in this house for you, this is a 2-year story as well. 2.5-year story, I think. Saturn will make its slow ingress through Pisces in your 11th house. So there's going to be some containers that we need to put in place as far as your intuitive prowess and as far as your, longing to share and to move around and to connect with everyone. There is a container here. There is a boundary that might need to be set, which is important for you moving forward. This square is happening between Sagittarius in your 8th house, Pisces in your 11th house. So there is something that you can speak to about grief that perhaps you're being galvanized to do because of Mars having been baptized by fire. There's something that does feel tense at this time, perhaps from your own personal experience, looking at the woes of the human species at this current moment. You can empathize with it, but there's something about severity in that empathy. There's perhaps some things that this Gemini full moon might be coaxing you to say, or there might be, the cat might have your tongue, but maybe not any longer. There might feels a bit unstable. I'm not telling you to silence yourself by any means, and I am definitely telling you that this might be a global experience. There might be a lot of conversations that are happening in staccato rhythm, in tandem, and there might be too much noise at this time. So if we can refocus and regroup the sentiment of Gemini in all of this, because this square is sort of happening too with the moon. When I think about the first decan of Gemini, 4 degrees of Gemini, where the full moon will take place, this is the 8 of Swords. And so you can see that anxious cage that's been developed over time. Too much truth, too many differing perspectives on truth, too much input, too much information can sometimes have us feel so scared and trapped that we don't know what it is we do value, or how we are going to help, how we're going to use our resources to provide a salve, to stand up for what we feel that we need to stand up for. We feel silenced, we feel blind in this moment, and it can be really scary. The Gemini cards in the minor arcana aren't easy. It's the 8, the 9, the 10 of Swords, all really intense, sharp, sorrowful cards. But we've got to remember the major secret of Gemini is the Lovers. There's a reflection that happens in the Lovers, in the glyph itself, which could be read as 2 mirrors, and reflection, light, love bouncing off one another. That's the way astrologer Alan Oken describes the glyph of Gemini. In the esoteric philosophy, Gemini is actually ruled by Venus rather than by Mercury. Mercury on a personality level, on a soul level, it's Venus. And so you can see that extra correlation with the Lovers card. I believe that your talents and your resources are put to the essence of love. I believe that if you follow that impulse, Taurus rising, if you truly put your proverbial money where your mouth is, it's a very good Gemini metaphor, that what you're working towards is for community and is for love and is for sharing and understanding. There's a certain perspective that you have on life, Taurus, that's specific to you. And it's something that you can share with other people, and it's something that other people will recognize parts of themselves in too. And hopefully you can recognize yourself in the reflection of others moving forward. That might be a nice little prayer to have as we think about this trial by fire that Mars, your passion, your conviction, has been through in your 7th house of relationships, of loved ones and collaborators. No crap moving forward. I remind myself that there's a million different ways to earn money, as difficult and remote as that can sometimes feel for certain people that do have a checkered history with having enough. When you're scraping the bottom of the barrel, it's very difficult to get out of poverty. I completely respect and understand that wholeheartedly. One good part of the conversation is that there is a multitude of different ways to earn money and to provide yourself, to resource yourself. It's what we do with the excess, what we do with that moving forward and moving around, that perhaps is having a little conversation with your 11th house, with your responsibilities to community, communion, cooperative language. I'm very proud of you, Taurus rising, and I think that ultimately we're moving through this kind of tension together, so we can definitely feel as Gemini wood dissociative in response to thousands of conversations happening at all times, limitless information available at our fingertips at all times. It can be overwhelming. It can run the system ragged. What's going to happen in the astrology after this moon, which we will reckon with, our sense of self-worth, is probably a great conversation to have at this time, Taurus rising. What we can look forward to after that is some lovely aspects from Venus as a sort of beautiful, righteous, feminine coolant after some of the harsher aspects that the two chauvinist malefics have in store for us. And so Venus rules your sign, the goddess of beauty, love, artistry, and pleasure. So we'll look forward to that moving forward too. Been thinking a lot about the goddesses lately, and I've been doing a lot of reading. You can see I've got my little copy of Cassandra Speaks there by Elizabeth Lesser. My mum lent me that to read. And the value in taking the mythology, the stories that we've been told time and time and time over, perhaps the stories we've been told about ourselves, but the stories that we've sort of gleaned subconsciously as a collective culture, insofar as the gender roles or the binary of that gender parity. It's the wrong word. You understand what I mean. Keep going. The essence of all exists in us, Taurus rising, and we have access to further extrapolate on these mythologies, as evidenced by authors like Elizabeth Lesser. Madeline Miller's another great one. I just read her short story Galatea, which really moved me. Retelling of the Pygmalion mythology, the woman brought to life, crafted by the hand of the artist. Well, in this story by Madeline Miller, Galatea's got a cross to bear, and she will be heard, and she will have her humanity seen. It's a bit tougher than My Fair Lady. I think about my contemporary goddess worship. I think about Catwoman. I think about Gemini full moons as representing my Catwoman essence. Really, honestly, truly, it sounds facetious. I'm not being facetious. I have a Gemini moon placement, and so I do really understand the friction that Gemini energy can sometimes bring up, the conversation that can sometimes be a barrage of insults or of criticism, critique, of trauma being brought up time and time and time again. When I think of Catwoman and the duality of her nature, the two sides to Selena and to Catwoman, and I think about the beautiful portrayal by Michelle Pfeiffer of that duality and that fight between the two, and the fight for righteousness, but then the kamikaze mission of self-destruction that folks suffering from trauma can sometimes go on. I think about 1992, the 16th of June, when that movie was released, probably at 5 p.m. in Hollywood. That's when they have premieres. And I think about the sun at 26 degrees of Gemini in exact conjunction with Venus at 26 degrees of Gemini. And I think about the asteroid Selena at 11 degrees of Gemini. And by the time I've thought about all of that, by the time I transpose that onto my birth chart and look at the intense integrity that that configuration holds for my Gemini moon, I look back to myself at 8 years old and I think, well, you got it then, unconsciously. And it's my mission in life to reimagine, retell, to give extra texture to these mythologies moving forward. In the old days, they were told with storytelling rather than the written word. Folks couldn't read and write. It was irrelevant to their understanding of life, unnecessary for their lives. They'd tell the story, extrapolate on, further to. That's what you can do as well, Taurus rising. We honour the tradition and we understand the malleability of that in the contemporary context. And I see you ready. I see your magic from when you were a kid, ready, Taurus rising. The ways in which you would move with this world, your intuitive prowess, your relationship to Earth and its creatures, the way that you could read patterns, the way that you could create art with whatever was at hand, that's all in you, and it's all going to imbue your sense of self-value, self-worth with an extra texture. I see that it's been a great sort of clarifying moment for you as far as the truth of reality right now. That's something that we can't shy away from, and we can't love and light it all away. Absolutely not. That's irresponsible. There's a truth and a clarity here that sometimes can be very sharp, but I see that there's a bravery here too, and there's a direction that you can move with. I see that we're actually stepping from this Gemini card, this 9 of Swords, when you're up at night and the repetition of worry, of grief, of sorrow, of trauma, of loss, of memory has you unable to sleep. That's very Gemini, and that's very painful. And that's actually the symbol of the moon in Gemini. I'll explain that to you in another reading, but each decan has a texture as to why this is the tarot card. This tarot card, the 9 of Swords, was written after moon in Gemini energy. You are very brave, Taurus rising, to be able to continue. And you're just at the beginning of this journey too, I might say. This is a powerful part of your life. Everything that you've learned from that dragon's head over the past 2 years has imbued your soul purpose with something close to mastery. And I'm incredibly proud of you. And we can set the if you feel it, talk about it. It's all Gemini wants. It's all this figure needs. Someone to speak to. Up at night, repetitious thought, repetitious worry. They say that a problem solved, a problem shared is a problem halved, is what they say. Get it together. Talk about how you're feeling, honey. Talk about, get it off your chest, get it out of the brain. Because if Gemini is kept refracting and reflecting just in the mind, there's no movement there. There's no hope. So get it out. Find those that you can get it out with. You're very brave. I love you. Meow. So we're moving into gift-giving season. I understand this to be true. And if you are wanting to give the gift of Uma to your friends and loved ones and buy them a reading with me, you can do so. Send me an email at urok@umaruby.com and we can organize a gift certificate for them and they can book at their leisure. If I've not read for you yet, book yourself in. Treat yourself, Eddie, at umaruby.com by the bookings page. If you'd like to support my work moving forward, you can subscribe to this channel at buymeacoffee.com/umaruby for 10 Australian dollars per month. And if you'd like to put some money in the tip jar, you can do that at that address as well. All of the links are in the description box below. I love you very much, Taurus rising. You're doing such a brilliant job. And I'll be with you in 2 weeks. And we're going to speak about the new moon in Sagittarius. So we're going to refocus on your 8th house of grief and loss and pleasure, ecstasy, commitment, contracts signed. And we'll see what Sagittarius has to tell us about that very intricate, very powerful place for you. I love you. Hello, Virgo rising. Welcome to your horoscope for the Gemini full moon, happening on November the 27th at 8:16 p.m. if you're in the Southern Hemisphere with me. So if your body is near mine on planet Earth at this full moon, you might want to look over to the eastern horizon, because at moonrise, the moon will be fullest. And so this will be the time to start or continue that conversation with the moon. In Gemini, it's imperative that we talk about it. And sometimes in an environment of such frenetic, consistent conversation, that can feel like the last thing that you want to do. When I think about Gemini, I think about the quality of the sign, which is mutable air, which means impressionability, which means an ability to converse. There's two of them in Gemini. There's the twins. In tarot, we look to the Lover's card. In the esoteric philosophy of astrology, we speak about love, and we speak about refraction and reflection. The glyph of Gemini is two mirrors, and light, love, reflection is bounced off those mirrors, enabling this one and that one to see themselves truly for who they are. You could say that the winged angel up top is the conversation, is the light, the love, the understanding, the willingness to engage in communication with the other. Now, the mutable signs, as you are, your mutable earth, malleable clay, sturdy, grounded. All of the mutable signs are going through a bit of a hectic time at this full moon. So if we look over to your 7th house, Virgo rising, we see Pisces, and we can see the influence of Saturn in Pisces. There's 2 planets in our zodiac, in our stratosphere, in our universe, that you could possibly say, are the malefic planets, which means they're the ones that bring difficult lessons. So Mars and Saturn both have harsher words, have harsher activation, harsher consequences. If you think about the tarot, it's the tower can represent Mars. So when these 2 planets are in conflict, which is as they are at this full moon, there's a square. In fact, the day before, on the 26th of November, that square would have been exact. So there might be some overexertion intention that you can feel leading up to this full moon, which hopefully will provide some release. But when I look at your chart, Virgo rising, this is between your 7th house of relationships and your 10th house of your most public self. This is where the moon is, where you're most visible, where your career is. At a full moon in Gemini, we get to feel the culmination of our efforts in this place. We get to thank the moon and thank our 10th house, thank our ability, our great perception at communication in that area. But with this square, it feels like there's a conflict between your relationships, those that you would hold near and dear, close ones to you, and the public sort of audibility of what it is that you're having to say. Down in Sagittarius, where the sun is reflecting its light to the moon and squaring this tension with Saturn, and also Mars in the 4th too. This is the uncomfortable nature or texture of the astrology that I can see. Gemini wants us to talk about it. Gemini wants us to get it off our chests. Gemini wants to get to the truth of the matter. But the multiplicity of the nature of Gemini is that there's multiple truths, there's multiple ideas, responses, perspectives, and that can cause such friction that sometimes Geminis will dissociate and they'll just tap out. They'll become so internalized with that conflict, they'll internalize the outer conflict into themselves that there's no option, there's no room for release. The tarot card for the moon at this time is the 8 of Swords, Virgo rising. So you can see this is sort of an image of that internal conflict becoming something like a cage, being trapped by the mind or trapped by ideology, trapped by what is believed to be the truth, that there's fear involved with this card too. We've got to tell them that there is a way out. They're not as trapped as they think they might be. If they were to take the blindfold off, they could see their way clear of this danger. They could move forward. What I love about this card is they're standing on wet earth. They're standing on a bit of clay. So perhaps your back is strong enough at this time to aid this conversation moving forward. It might not too. It might just be a big blow up, and it might be a big argument, big lot of sorrow released. And that's really valid too. This square between Mars and Saturn happens, and folks that look to astrology take note of it. It's sort of a moment of real conflict and pressure. So we're kind of prepared in our bodies for that, aren't we? Maybe a bit hyper-vigilantly at this time. I'm looking for the release. I'm looking at Mercury now too, because that is the planet that will guide you along in this life, Virgo rising, or one of them anyway. Virgo, the sign, is ruled by Mercury. So we look to Mercury in configuration to see what else we can add to this conversation, as Mercury likes to do, to decipher, to get to the bottom of, to talk about. And so Mercury is simultaneously in square with Neptune in Pisces. So there is a sense of like delusion here that is being criticized or critiqued. There is like a direct line of inquiry into your relationships about the delusion that they are under, based on some fairly solid ground in your home base, your root system, your legacy, your ancestry. There's information that you have that perhaps they don't, that you are calling out this delusion. Also, there's a trine happening between Mercury and the dragon's head in the 8th house for you, Virgo rising. Now, the 8th house is where we grieve and where we understand the profundity of human relationship, and where we have to cry our tears to say goodbye, where our resources are interwoven with other people as well. So there's going to be an emphasis on this part of your life moving forward as far as the eclipses are concerned. So when it comes to this connection between that and your home, your roots, your ancestry, your privacy, I feel that there's a deeper truth, and hopefully this can be echoed in the way that you publicly talk about things. Maybe in communion with this moon, you can find the freedom to be able to speak to these things. In the esoteric philosophy, it is actually the moon that will lead the way for Virgo, which is lovely. So in keeping your eye on Mercury, also keep your eye on the moon too. And you can probably look out and see how this moon might be affecting other people's communication styles and what they are choosing to talk about or hyper-focus on. And that might be a bit difficult to watch too. So publicly, 10th house is right at the top of the chart, so it's very visible. Just keep this information with you. We've just entered Sagittarius season, so there's going to be, until December, a big focus on your home, your roots, what you consider to be a grounding place for you, a place that's private and a place that's safe. All of these things will start to be focused in on, harnessed in on, moving forward. I'm going to get you some tarot, I think, Virgo rising, because I'm doing my absolute very best to work with this astrology, and my context for my work moving forward. I've been doing a lot of learning from astrologers that I admire about the astrology of times of crisis, and when that's a help and when it's a hindrance, and the perhaps the question of faith that can arise when noticing patterns, noticing synchronicities in the sky, but then having a feeling of powerlessness as far as what to do with that information and it being of no real use or help, and the contextualization of this work in the greater context of the world's current distress. And I can see here that you're with me on this, that it feels like that there's sort of, you're not quite sure how much there is left in you to keep going, to keep holding the faith and holding the hope. However, you're not licked yet. And in fact, there's a great deal of fortitude that can be found in the Nine of Wands, because beaten and battered and insulted and put upon as you may be, you're standing your ground in the truth of the matter, and you're standing your ground in the essence of the magic of this moment, of the fire. Hope and faith are powerful things, and that's a bitter pill to swallow when it feels hopeless and when you feel faithless. And if that's what you're going through at this time, Virgo rising, I fully respect that, and I hope that I'm not speaking out of turn here or that's insulting for you. What I see is a idyllic sense which might be attached to this sort of Neptunian delusion too in your relationships. There's a place of clearing and clarity and happiness that you long for. Happier times is something that we can reminisce about in times of crisis too. We can sort of, the Gemini parts of ourselves can recall and recollect times gone by that were sweeter than perhaps the ones that we're enduring right now. But then here's the Hermit. Here's your strength, your essence. Sometimes the solitude that you take that is essential for you to move forward is powerful. We retreat from the reality or the responsibility of social life, of community, of interaction. There's moments in our lives where we need to take ourselves away to regulate and to really zone in on and harness in on the truth that we can glean, to process all of this information that's sort of being laid upon us, all of this, these opinions, these different pathways to, a sense of righteousness. We have to turn off the noise from time to time in order to hear what is really being said to us, what is being offered to us. It's confusing, and that's what Gemini does, confuses things too, because it's that consistent to and fro, back and forth, mirror, reflection, repeat, interjection. But have you considered that can all get so this? I'm reminded of where Saturn is right now in your 7th house of your relationships. The first decan of Pisces speaks to the 8 of Cups. And this could be read in some ways as an abandonment, as leaving the set. It could also be looked at as going out to seek the cup that is missing. It could also be looked at as coming back to this place. But this journey that I'm on right now requires me to go it alone. When looking for love and compassion and safety and understanding in times that are as difficult as they are now, it can be really tempting to throw it all in the bin and to abandon it all, to burn every bridge, to set it all alight, to say fuck you to everyone. That's what they want, division and separation in order to control. We can witness that, we can understand that to be true. It doesn't help us to feel any more powerful. I get that too. It's in moments of quiet solitude and contemplation that I can recalibrate and I can find the strength again. And so hopefully that's something that you can feel too, Virgo rising. Hopefully that's something that you can rely on, is this idea of like, I'm the hermit embodied. When I need to be alone, I'm going to be fucking Greta Garbo and be alone. Or was that Marlene Dietrich? One of them. Got Isabella Rossellini. I want to be alone. Can't remember if that was Greta Garbo or Marlene Dietrich. You'll tell me. I'm sure you're aware. Happier times. We're sort of entering, a period of celebration. Some folks are finding it difficult to find the wherewithal to celebrate. Some people don't feel entitled to celebrate. Some people will not celebrate. And that's completely justified too. But you'll go at your own pace, and you'll find the avenues that give you comfort and give you support and understanding and a feeling of like release from this overactive crisis mode. I've been thinking a lot about the different ways and different parts of the brain that will have effect over our behaviors as well. And that trigger response of danger can have us freeze sometimes, can have us fight, absolutely, to kick back, can also have us just stopped in our tracks and just unwilling to move. And so this is where I sort of look at the Eight of Swords again. That feels to me like a big trigger response, like a freeze. So maybe at this full moon in Gemini, when, all eyes are on the public self, the career, the legacy, the growth of your life, of your chart, there might be something of feeling a bit frozen. That's the case, Virgo rising. It's okay. That's okay. After this full moon and after this friction, we're moving into a week with some really nice Venus aspects. So there's going to be a coolant, there's going to be the righteous femme coming forward, washing wounds, healing trauma, listening, understanding, and loving. Hopefully we can look forward to more of that. That's your reading, babe. I love you. Oh shit, I've told everyone, I may as well tell you. I was thinking about my relationship with Catwoman. You can, if this is interesting to you, please continue. Because I think that Gemini full moons and Gemini, this moment for me anyway, always reminds me of Catwoman. And I think back to times gone by. That's what I use astrology for, is to go backwards, to go forwards. And it's a bit of a Catwoman energy. And I think about her place in my pantheon of deities, my goddesses, and from when I was 8 years old until now, that sort of true relationship and true reverence I have for this particular version of the mythology of the character Catwoman. I think about when the movie was released in 1992 on the 16th of June, and I think about the Sun and Venus being exactly conjunct at 26 degrees of Gemini. I think about the asteroid Selena being at 11 degrees in Gemini too. And I think about the transposition on my chart and my Gemini moon. And by the time I've gotten from the beginning of the thought to now, it's given some sense of context to my predilections, to my obsessions, to my points of hyperfocus. If that was helpful, I hope that it was. Meow. Difficulty with duality, light, shadow, character locked in trauma response, unable to connect because of that. Beautiful parable that we can work with and move with. Now we are coming into gift giving season in some parts of the world, Virgo rising. So if you are wanting to give the gift of me to somebody, email me at yourok@umaruby.com and we can organize a gift certificate for a reading for your loved ones. If I've not read for you yet and you're champing at the bit to get that done, You can book yourself in straight away at umaruby.com. You can subscribe to my horoscopes for 10 Australian dollars a month. That would be very much appreciated at buymeacoffee.com/umaruby. And you can also throw some money in the tip jar at the same place, buymeacoffee.com/umaruby. Much love to you, Virgo rising. I'm going to be with you in 2 weeks, and we're going to continue to focus on your roots, on your privacy, your home, your ancestry, and what that might look like. We've got a new moon in Sagittarius that we will work with and ask for what we require to feel safe, protected, warm, and nourished. So I'll speak to you then. Take care.